Hi everyone, and welcome to this video, which is one of a series of videos looking at members of my classic computer collection. And today we're going to have a look at one of my favourites. It is a classic computer. It is the Macintosh SE 30, this one here. And we're also going to have a quick look at its successor, the Macintosh Classic II. So let's check them out. It was with great fanfare that Apple had introduced the first Macintosh in 1984. It didn't quite live up to expectations. Despite its intuitive graphical user interface, the lack of a hard drive and the fact it was squeezed for memory meant the machine failed to dominate the high end of the personal computer market, as Steve Jobs had hoped. However, it had showed enough promise to further develop the line. Fast forward to the end of 1988, and the Macintosh had found its niche in desktop publishing, graphic design, and amongst many that wrote for a living. There were now three Macintosh lines. One was a colour Macintosh 2 series, which had assumed the more conventional three-part form factor of keyboard, box and screen. The other two models, seen at the bottom of this image, favoured the classic look, with a mono screen integrated into the whole unit, looking very much like the original Macintosh 128. These two Baby Mac lines consisted of the older, lower-end floppy disk-based Mac Plus and the more capable Macintosh SE, which came with two floppy drives or a floppy drive and a hard disk drive. To be productive machines in the mid to late 1980s workplace, a computer really had to have a hard disk drive, and the hard disk-fitted SEs were popular. January 1989 saw the SE replaced with the SE 30. This is the computer we'll mostly be focusing on in this video. The SE30 featured a 16 MHz 32-bit Motorola 68030 CPU. Originally it could address 8 MB of RAM, but through a third-party patch, which fixed the original 24-bit wide ROM, allowing it 32-bit addressing, expansion to an incredible 128 MB was possible. The units normally shipped with a 40 or 80 MB hard drive and a 1.44 MB floppy drive. When running System 6.0.3, the OS originally shipped with the machine, the computer was blazingly fast. This and its huge memory capacity saw the model being put to use as a server in some office environments. It's a most loved model and considered the most capable of the classic or baby Macs. Here you can see my SE30. It's in good nick with hardly any sign of the yellowing that decorates my original Mac 128. You'll all recognise the classic shape harking back to that original Mac. It has the traditional recess in the top for easy toting around. It has 16 MB of RAM on board and comes with a 40 MB hard drive. So coming around the back we see a couple of ports for keyboard and mouse. There's a external floppy disk drive connector, a SCSI connector for hard drives, printer port, there's a modem port, and there's a stereo socket there for audio. Up to the label, you can see this one's being assembled in Ireland of all places, and scrolling to the top we can see it proudly displaying the name Macintosh SE 30. Here's the main board. It's not my main board, it's an image that I borrowed off the web, but I borrowed it because it was labelled, extensively labelled, so you can see what the different parts do. But notice the 8 SIM slots there. That's a lot of slots. You can see how easy it is to expand the memory in this machine. There's one external connector, and that was used for things like a network card. Now I thought you might get a laugh out of this photo. This is my SE30 motherboard, and you can see there one of the RAM cards being held in by a rubber band. They have these little catches on these SIM slots that can easily break or snap off, and that particular slot does have one of these snapped catches, and the only way I could get the card to sit there tightly was to use a rubber band. So it looks a bit Heath Robertson, as we'd say here in New Zealand, but it seems to do the job. So now we've looked at the basic hardware, let's put the machine through its paces. I'll show you the boot up sequence a little later on. Here's the interface that I'm using. I've got System 7.1 installed on this SE30.
It is a later OS than it would have come out with originally. This OS is 1992, but it certainly runs fast enough on this machine. Now, given that most people watching this video will be familiar with this operating system, I wondered what I could show you that you might not have seen, and I decided to load up a game called Battle Chess. Now, it's one that I've shown in previous videos. I think I might have showed this with my AT machine, but it's a little different on the Mac. I suspect it's a later version, but it's crystal clear and it's got some good sound and some quite zany fight scenes, so we'll just let it play along a bit and you can listen. Here's one of the fight scenes. Now that reminded me very much of that scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where you had someone being attacked that just wouldn't give in. I like this one too. This is the cat fight between the two queens. Let's just watch this. I like that. And now we have the king and the queen. They have a bit of a cuddle, and she tries to stab him in the back, but as he can take her on that square, he eventually dispatches it. It certainly makes chess rather entertaining. Now, I've edited this sequence with the computer playing itself, but when you see it running, it's just amazing how fast this computer is. It doesn't take it long to figure out those moves. So we've got other things here. We've got MS Word. And I've got a document here that I wrote in MS Word. Now, one thing I do with all these videos is, at the beginning, when I talk about the historical aspects of these computers, I actually have that written out. And I do that so I don't forget anything important. So I thought this time I'd actually write that section on the Mac SE30, since I'm going to be talking about it. So here it is here. And you know, as I was writing this, I was thinking, boy, no wonder people that owned these machines back in the late 1980s used to laugh at us poor PC users struggling with our WordPerfect, because editing is just a joy with this piece of software. Now, I know it's passé now. I mean, all word processors are like this to a greater or lesser extent, but compared to what we had to do on PCs back in the late 1980s, this editing was really easy. Now, something else to show you, an external hard drive unit. This is a third-party unit. Essentially, inside there you've got a SCSI drive and its power supply. So it's a large flat box, and you just plug it into the back of the SE through a SCSI cable like that, and you've got a lot more storage. So I booted up the machine, this time with the external hard drive attached, and you can see there's an icon there showing that the computer has recognised that it's got one. And I've got a lot of software stored on here, so it's a bit of a software library. So I've got some OS images. One thing I want to show you though is HyperCard. Now, this is a piece of software that came out on the Macintosh in the late 80s, early 90s. I think it can be best described as authorware, in that it allowed you to very easily construct hypertext type presentations. So you could navigate through these stacks, and every stack had a card. You could use different fonts, you could use images in these cards, you could link cards together, and you could build up quite sophisticated programs with them. For example, here's an appointment book made of a HyperCard stack. Here's an address book with some audio, and you can navigate through that address book. It was a great piece of software. In the early 90s, I worked with an Apple developer here at the university, and we made some HyperCard stacks for one of my teaching modules. I was going to show it, but I decided this video is really about the machine rather than my teaching. Oh, this shot just shows how you can sit the Macintosh on top of that external hard drive, making for a smaller footprint on the desk. So that's the SE30. Despite being a very nifty little machine, Apple superseded the SE30 in 1991 with this machine, the Macintosh Classic II. For reasons which seem hard to fathom, the later Classic II was a step backwards from the SE30. It had the same 68030 CPU and a 40 or 80 megabyte hard disk, but was limited to a 16-bit bus and only 10 megabytes of RAM. It was about half the speed of its predecessor. The expansion slot was also absent, which means the unit was unexpandable. The only reason I could think of as to why Apple would do this is that they saw the Classic II, or Performer 200 as it was also called, as a low-end machine and crippled it so it wouldn't compete with the higher-end colour models. If anyone knows if this assumption is correct or whether there was some other reason, please feel free to comment. So here's my Classic II. Actually, it is a nice looking machine. It's more rounded and a little sleeker in appearance than the SE30. I've had to wash those notorious leaky capacitors to get it going though. I've processed a few of these Classic IIs, and this is typically what a board would look like that wasn't working. This board's quite dusty, but you can see those clear areas around the capacitors. That's where fluid would have leaked from the capacitors onto the board, and that fluid, that electrolyte, was causing a short circuit, so the machine didn't work. Now originally I fixed this by simply washing the whole board in the dishwasher, and that actually seemed to work, but it was rather extreme, so later I used these cotton buds, or Q-tips as some people in the world would call them, and with a bit of isopropyl alcohol I just went around the capacitors and cleaned up the area underneath them, and that seemed to do the job just as well. So coming around the back of the unit, we can see a label there proudly proclaiming that it's a Macintosh Classic II. Going down, having a look at the ports, we've got a microphone input socket, which is something we don't have on the other machine. There's just a single connector there for a keyboard because it's assumed that the Apple Keyboard 2 will be used with this machine, and you can plug a mouse into that. There's the external floppy disk drive port, the external SCSI hard disk port, and your normal modem, printer and modem ports there, plus your audio jack for headphones. So now I thought I'd do a face-off, so I'll boot these machines simultaneously for you. So this is the SE30 and the Classic II, and you'll be able to see the difference in speed between a 16-bit bus and a 32-bit bus. They both have System 7.1 installed, so they've got exactly the same software. So the SE30 is finished, and the Classic II is still chugging along. And finally the Classic II is finished, so as you can see, quite pedestrian compared to the SE30. Right, let's have a look at some documents. Now it's a Macintosh, so you don't really need documentation with it, do you? But I have got this Macintosh guide. It's an interesting manual, this one, because it's quite generic. It's published in 1992, so essentially it deals with System 7.1 software, or at least versions around that time. It doesn't specify any particular machines, although, a few of the diagrams there would suggest your classic Mac, but it's just a book for Macintoshes of that time, running an operating system in the early 1990s. So quite useful if you had never used the Mac before. You'd probably want to use this book. I've only got one other manual, and it's a manual that I use or have used for both Macintoshes. It's the Dead Mac Scrolls, and it's a great book to have if you ever need to repair or find out some of the details of the innards as far as the baby Macintoshes are concerned. So you can see it's been well thumbed and well used, not by me, but by the previous owner or owners. So it's a bit of ancient history itself. You can just see here from the contents the machines that it supports. So early Macs, Mac SE and SE30, along with the Mac II.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that look at those two computers. They are the last of the baby Macs, and certainly ones that I quite enjoy having in my collection. Classic II does most of the work, but the SE30, that is the real treasure. So until next time, keep well, and we'll see you in the next video.